is a barrister candidate, LLM, LLB from Nottingham University. He will briefly brief you on what it is. And thereafter, I will invite the next speaker, Amila Wijesinghe from Nottingham University.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to this event. We have with us today a group of very distinguished and eminent speakers, and I'm sure that we are all looking forward to hear what they have to say. The topic of today's seminar is on foreign policy, and specifically that of Sri Lanka. As the speakers of this panel have much expertise in this area from their various professional backgrounds, I will just try to give some basic background and ideas as a small introduction before we get to hear from them shortly. Sri Lanka is a beautiful island with a rich cultural heritage and many amazing attributes, such as its tradition, its diversity, and overwhelming natural beauty that makes it unique. But whenever we talk about Sri Lankan foreign policy, the first thing to be noted is that it is a small state. Not just in terms of the size of its land, but also in terms of its population, its economy, and its political clout in the international sphere. At the same time, even though it's small, due to its location, it is inevitably of great geostrategic interest to much larger and more powerful states. This is not in itself necessarily a bad thing, but perhaps suggests how important this country's management of its foreign relations is to make the best use of this for the benefit of its people. The foreign policy of any country is shaped by domestic considerations and pragmatic decisions based on working within the international system. Often international and domestic policies become intertwined, and decisions are affected by a variety of competing interests. Sri Lanka's small size and its strategic importance means that it often has to contend with the domestic interests of other more powerful states. For example, Sri Lanka's relations with India span back as far as ancient times. Our proximity to each other means that our foreign policies in relation to each other are significantly affected by our own domestic considerations. The relative disproportionate difference between the two countries, with India being much larger, with a huge population, has meant that there has historically been many reservations about our relations with our giant neighbor. India as well has worried about the effects of any instability in the region and the security of their southern coastlines. This highlights the need for cooperation between the two countries. And whilst relations have improved since the unfortunate and disastrous period when they pursued more interventionist policies, there may still be scope for more improvement. As an emerging superpower, with an economy nearly rivaling that of the United Kingdom, relations with India can potentially be significantly beneficial. But with that being said, the realities of international relations are so that the domestic considerations of India may sometimes limit what it can do. The influence of Tamil Nadu politics has historically affected what it can and can't do, and better relations can counteract that issue. On the other hand, China, for example, is similar in that it is disproportionately so much larger than Sri Lanka in size, in population, and in economy. But the dynamics of our relations are very different from that with India, because we do not share the same proximity. China's interest in Sri Lanka is relatively insignificant compared to their foreign policy in relation to their own neighbors. Sri Lanka's interest in China is largely shaped by its domestic initiatives stemming from its One Belt, One Road initiative that aims to revive international trade and connectivity routes. This was inspired by the Silk Routes of history, which even facilitated the spread of Buddhism to China. The huge amount of investment by China for this policy means that it will likely form a large part of its foreign policy considerations for the foreseeable future. Sri Lanka is an important component in this endeavor due to our maritime location. China's deep pockets and centralized decision-making have made it an attractive partner for development, as well as their investment being seen as less likely to come with conditional strings attached. And one more state I'll mention is the United States, a country that is a superpower with significant international clout and which makes great efforts to keep it that way. It has been the largest financial contributor to the UN, and it has shown itself willing to withhold funding when it's in disagreement with that organization. The mere fact that Sri Lanka is of such interest to both China and India means that by extension, it will be so to the US as well. The rising power of China, escalating tensions with North Korea are just some of the reasons why the US will be taking note of everything that happens in the Asian region. Whilst the US has attempted to counterbalance reliance on China by many countries, the recent decision to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which had been viewed by many as an attempt to reinvigorate the US's geopolitical influence as the largest trade deal in history, reflects its move towards a more inward-looking domestic policy. Now, these were just some examples of influential powers that have some interest in this small island country, and with whom relations form a vital part of Sri Lanka's foreign policy considerations. We have shifted between different foreign policies shaped by successive governments. Some chose to offset the influence of one against the other through balancing, and others relied on bandwagoning with stronger states to align our interests with that of more powerful forces. Yet arguably, our most successful approach has been that of non-alignment. Our small state status means that our foreign policy should not antagonize those with an interest in our affairs or the affairs of our region. And we should instead reap the maximum benefits of a wide range of cooperation. A non-aligned approach was crucial to winning the war against the LTTE, as it allowed us to cooperate in terms of military and intelligence, and to distance ourselves from the counterproductive effects of international politics, and to avoid excessive intervention from larger powers. We often see many similarities between us and Singapore, being a small state with great potential. Pursuing a non-aligned foreign policy has been crucial to the success of Singapore, as envisioned by S. Rajaratnam, the country's first foreign minister following independence, who saw it as an essential requisite in navigating the jungle of international politics, in his words. They have maintained good relations with the West as well as China, who they recognize as a vital strategic partner owing to their growing regional power. Their policy of focusing on bringing in investment as part of good relations has reaped massive economic rewards. In the shaping of foreign policy, the influence of domestic politics is, of course, inevitable. But we should attempt to distinguish political statements and posturing from how policies are implemented in practice. This applies both to us and other states, as there is much difference between what is said and what is done. Whilst we may have differences of opinion or ideology, in practice, what is important is what we actually do, and for it to be in the interests of the country and its people. It is therefore important to be consistent in maintaining wide and friendly international associations, as few countries want to invest in a state which dramatically shifts its foreign relations with every single change of government. In the interests of preserving our sovereignty and independence, it would be counterproductive and inimical to these objectives to make enemies or unnecessarily create cause for concern by aligning too closely with one major power and creating insult with a sudden arbitrary shift. Taking an autonomous and principled approach allows us to be independent, to facilitate economic cooperation, to promote tourism to our beautiful island, and to remove ourselves from the vagaries of international politics. To conclude, these were just some brief introductory ideas on the topic of foreign policy, and I will leave it there, as I'm sure we're all eagerly waiting to hear from our distinguished and eminent guests on the panel today. So thank you very much.